Good morning, lady. Chat is working. If anybody has any questions over the course of the webinar, please add them in and I'll either answer them right away or answer them at the end. We also will post this in multiple places, and so if other stuff comes up, you're more than welcome to ask. If you're watching this in a replay later, please feel free to ask questions either on our Facebook page for the Orlando Law Group, my personal Facebook page. Those are probably the quickest ways. You can also ask them on the link that you find, however you find this link, but the quickest way is either to get it on my personal Facebook page or the Orlando Law Group one, or Stephen Carroll, who is our Director of Marketing and will be making the posts. So I will get started. It has been a long time since we've had one of these, which I guess is good. But a lot has happened since the last time I had one of these webinars that kind of talked about what we were to expect with PPP loans and all the CARES Act and the coronavirus and being an employer or being an employee or kind of just being a person in the world dealing with this stuff. There has been a huge new legislation. So based upon that, there's a lot of things to talk about. So I wanted to update, that's kind of going to be our topic. We will start though a little bit with the PPP Loan Forgiveness. I haven't done a webinar or any type of talking about that because it's been a constant changing, but now it's fairly close to where it needs to be. So if you do have to apply for some sort of forgiveness, now's the time to be doing that. I did check the SBA website as late as this morning, and they had not made any changes at all to update anything. So it's kind of in its spot where it was before they made the legislative changes about 10 days ago. It was 10 days ago on Wednesday, and one expected that there would be some changes to the SBA website, but there wasn't. Obviously, there was a whole lot of chaos and things in Washington. So I think we can excuse them for that, but this is going to be a continuously changing situation, just like it kind of has been since March. This is the most recent information though, and if there's new information that you really need to know that's going to impact you, I'll make sure we do another one of that we'll talk about it again in some other form or fashion, I promise. So if you do have a PPP loan, lenders are all accepting the forgiveness applications now. Some are better than others. So if you haven't heard from your lender, don't be passive about it. Ask them what you need to do to get the forgiveness done. The process is basically you do one application through your lender. The lender then lets you know whether you're approved or not for forgiveness. And then it goes on to the SBA, and then they either usually, hopefully, will rubber stamp what your lender did. For example, our PPP loan is already through our lender state, but I haven't heard back from the SBA. I do have clients though that I know have already heard back from the SBA and they have said you're forgiven. My thought is now though, since they've opened up a whole other round of PPP, that the SBA is probably going to be consumed with that. So there's probably going to be a holdup in getting the forgiveness from the SBA, but don't freak out, assume it's going to be forgiven as long as you follow the steps and did the application correctly. If you haven't done the application or you're super confused about how to do it, we're going to talk a little bit more about good practices for that. But again, it's time to contact an attorney or your accountant or somebody to help you. Bankers aren't helping very much, but there's all other types of people who are helping with this. So definitely get help if you need to. Now the SBA does have a loan necessity questionnaire for people who got more than $2 million. I don't think any of our audience will really be that. If you are somebody who did though, or especially if you had it over multiple companies, because some people have like multiple restaurants or multiple hotels or whatever that could be listening, there's some things that you have to fill out and you have to do it carefully. But a lot of this stuff is stuff that's also necessary for you to show if you're going to get a second PPP loan and you've already got the first one. So what they want to do is look at revenue comparisons between 2019 and 2020. And they're going to do it quarter by quarter. This is also what they're doing for the second round of PPP loans. So basically you have to show that you had a decrease in revenue between a quarter of 2019 and a quarter of 2020. So they're not looking at the whole year. They're not looking, I mean, you could pick whatever quarter you want. So because they're trying to be cognizant of people with seasonal businesses and all that kind of thing. So they actually are being pretty fair. So that's something to be looking at. I've already had our accountant start looking at our companies to kind of see if there is a difference quarter over quarter. So that's something as you're doing your taxes, and especially if you have the ability to switch revenue for the last quarter, you might want to take a look at that. Normally, the rule of thumb is if you have a business, you put as much revenue in or you do as much expenses depending on how things are going in the last quarter. And we're close to the end of the time where you could do that, but you still have a little bit of play. So be thinking of that. We're going to talk a little bit about other tax changes that makes that more important as well. They're going to look at your employee revenue and a bunch of other things if you're somebody that's in that top tier of PPP loans. But the main important thing is if you're not, is the revenue comparison, which is important for the second PPP loan as well. There are multiple applications for forgiveness. So that might be one of the spots where you get a little confused. Your bank should help you with some instructions, but they might not. So again, if you don't know which one to fill out, you need to fill out the right one or you won't get forgiven. There is an EZ form, which is cool. The IRS always puts out one of those, but it fits for people who may have a loan of under $150,000. So if your PPP loan was under $150,000, it's pretty much that it will be forgiven without a whole lot of hassle. It's a one-page form and it's super easy. There was a little bit back and forth about whether you even had to apply for it. You do have to apply no matter what your situation is, you have to apply for forgiveness. If it was only 150,000 or less, it's just a one-page form that's super easy. But don't just not apply and assume it's okay. Even if you don't hear anything, if later I've got to go fight with the SBA on your behalf or your bank, I'll want to see a paper trail of where you at least try to apply for forgiveness. As long as we have a paper trail, I'm confident we'll get things worked out. But don't just be like, oh, I haven't heard anything, so I'm just not going to do anything. That's never a good practice in anything, by the way. But the more paper I have, the better I can fight for your right to get everything forgiven. There also is, if you fit into a category of businesses that were shut down by the government that weren't essential, gyms, hotels, restaurants, some of them are pretty obvious, just the ones that were most impacted by shutdowns. They have their own form as well. That's also the easy form because it's pretty straightforward that you're going to lose money if you had to shut down for months, even weeks, because your business wasn't allowed to operate. This is even medical facilities and facialists and all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole lot out there for any business that was really just obviously impacted by the coronavirus, but even others that aren't, it's still pretty easy to get forgiveness and also then to move on to the second round of PPP loans. Now, if you do have a PPP loan, they are going to want some very specific documents. If you don't do anything, it basically matures within 10 months of your last date of using it. So we've got time to apply for the forgiveness. If you haven't applied, you still can. The new act also allows you to amend your application if you need to. Maybe you didn't take quite enough. Then you can go back and amend in the first round. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. It might be crazy. It's probably going to be easier to just apply for the second round. There's nothing on the website at all about what the amendment of the first round is going to look like, but the new act does allow for it. And if for some reason you didn't have a quarter over quarter enough of a downturn, but you still wanted to get some more money because your payroll or your rent ended up being more than you expected, maybe your landlord told you they were going to give you a discount and they didn't, something like that, you can go back and amend that first round of PPP loans. And as we get some information on that, we'll at least blog about it, but right now there's just none. Otherwise, then your loan's going to come due within 10 months of you last using it, and then they're going to start expecting payments in some way or another. Again, what that's going to look like, nobody knows. And because of the new round of PPP, it might still be crazy. But that cutoff is a whole lot quicker. We'll talk about that. So, I mean, I think they'll have things straight by the summer on both of these programs, unless there's a third round. And then obviously we'll talk about that. So if you do have to get your PPP loan forgiveness, obviously you need payroll documentation. If you have a payroll service, it's pretty easy. Companies like ADP and Gusto and things like that, they have the reports. There's multiple different ways you could calculate that forgiveness. I'm not going to go into that. We kind of did that previously, like I've talked about that before, and you could get those recordings off our YouTube channel and our website. But you do need your payroll. Your payroll tax return is pretty much the easiest thing to use, but there's other ways to do it as well. They want to see that your rent, and they want to see proof of the items that you're claiming. It's pretty straightforward. The only thing that gets a little wonky is the payroll, the way you're doing it, because there's multiple different ways to calculate payroll. And like I said, if you have specific questions about that, you could call the office and reach out specifically, or try to go back on our YouTube channel, because I did some previous webinar about just how to do those calculations. They pretty much stayed the same. We didn't really do it until it got sort of crystallized. Not a whole lot about that has changed. Nothing in the new act has changed how all that's going to be calculated. You just have the additional ability now to amend them if you want to. So they still have an interest rate of only 1% if you're going to end up having to pay them back. I don't really know. None of my clients I think, are in a spot where they have to pay them back. But if you are, this is kind of stuff to be thinking about if you're trying to make an educated decision about how to handle things. They all have a 2-year maturity rate, but the first payment is due 10 months after you take your last payment. There's no personal guarantee. None of that changed, so that's good. Again, nobody's taking these hoping that they go out of business. But if you're in a spot where your business is in trouble and you're not quite sure whether to take the funds, whether to worry about forgiveness and all of that, talk to an attorney about that. We've had bankruptcy clients in business where we're dealing with their PPP loans, or somebody who sold their business in the middle of the PPP loan forgiveness. We've had that as well. So there's all kinds of scenarios if you're bringing partners on. As long as there's not personal liability, we're usually not very concerned. This is a loan without personal liability. So wherever the problem is, we can help you work through it. Now you have to, like I said, we submit the form and the documentation to your lender, and then they eventually get back with you with whether it's going to be forgiven or not. You do need to communicate with the lender throughout the process. Some banks have have a portal and it's super easy, and they put updates in it. Some banks don't, but whatever it is, don't just hope that it happens. Continue to be diligent. We do have the ability to appeal if either your bank or the SBA finds that it's not forgivable. Banks want it to be forgiven because once they give the okay, then they get the money right from the SBA. So I don't see us having a lot of problems with our banks, but if the SBA gives you an issue, it's no problem. We can appeal it. Like I said, that's why I need the documentation, because they do have an appellate process. It's going to be crazy, but I'm pretty sure that they'll defer everything and payments and everything till you get to the end of that, as long as we're doing it in good faith. And I wouldn't let you do it if you weren't. So there you go. Now, one of the positives in the new act is if you got the EIDL grant, and that was something that kind of came up right at the beginning. So if you were paying attention, it was right at the beginning, $1,000. Well, it was going to be $10,000, and then they changed it to $1,000 per employee. But if you did have over 10 employees, you got the full $10,000. Originally, that was going to come off your loan forgiveness, and you were going to have to pay that back. There was all sorts of scenarios, but that was the most recent one. That is now gone. In the new version of the CARES Act, they got rid of that. So if you got one of those grants in any way, shape, or form, it's totally done and forgivable. It is not taken off your PPP loan. People who got it without the PPP loan, it was a grant straight out. But they were saying if you got a PPP loan along with it, they were going to take that off the forgivable part, but that part is gone. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. Now there is a whole other category of EIDL loans. There were grants and loans. That was super confusing at the beginning. but there is also a loan program that is kind of, I think that's still out there in some form. I have clients now that are starting to do the paperwork with their accountant on those loans. Most banks and accountants and the IRS are requiring a little bit of corporate paperwork on that, even if you're a sole proprietor. So if you have that come up, because that started to come up as people are doing their taxes already, we could take care of that for you for very inexpensively. They want like corporate resolutions and things like that. It's an SBA thing. SBA is super stringent on this stuff when you're doing a normal SBA loan. They want to see a lot of documentation. These loans obviously went through like a bullet super fast, but now they're doing a little bit of cleanup. If you need a little bit of that, don't freak out. It's not a big deal, but we could do it for you. I mean, I think I've done several this week and we'll continue to do that. So that's a real positive thing. Now, as far as the second round of PPP loans, because now it's available again, probably should be thinking about taking it one way or the other. They've been super forgiving. There's already talk about a third round coming. So if you're still in a spot where you ended up with less revenue, then you need to be thinking about this. Now, the tax law changes for businesses that came with this second round of the CARES Act are humongous. So if you have a business, whatever your tax planning was, it was crazy already, especially if you got a PPP loan. We'll talk a little bit about that. But now it is totally going to be different because of some of the changes that they made. So most likely, whatever revenue you have for the year of 2020 is going to be majorly changed in a good way. You're going to have lots of less taxable income in almost every scenario. But right now, before you start taking into account any of that, like I said, I would get your QuickBooks file and be looking at quarter over quarter between 2019 and 2020 and see if you had a quarter that was lower, then you should be thinking about filing for the second round. Now, if you didn't file the first time, then you should file. If you weren't eligible the first time because you were a sole proprietor or a 1099 or in some weird scenario where you didn't think you could apply, or you just didn't want to mess with it because it was very unclear, and it really was for 1099s and sole proprietors and things. Now it's very clear that it's open to just about everybody, every business, every type of business. It wasn't open to like 501c6s, and so chambers and stuff were left out. Now that's all open. So also if you're a board member of an organization that wasn't a 501c3, because 501c3s could apply for a PPP loan, now you can look at applying for a PPP loan. I'm on a board of several chambers, and like a couple of us applied for EIDL loans, but you couldn't do the PPP. So be looking on that, and that's a good idea. Like I said, if you're a board member also. So for the second round, anybody who's been impacted can apply by the coronavirus, but they're really looking at your revenue. Or like I said, if you're one of those businesses that just had to close, it's pretty straightforward. Some of them, especially in other parts of the country, not so much here in Florida, have already had to close again. So it's a whole lot more clearer. But yeah, sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed people, everyone could apply this time. So don't hesitate to look into it. There's a few other, for very large businesses, there's issues. You can't get more than 2 million and that sort of thing. I don't think that will apply, but if you are a really large business, then we should be talking about it. Before we get to the kind of the nuts and bolts of that, for people who are on here because they don't own businesses or they have a small business and they just want to know some of the other things. There's some tax changes for individuals as well as businesses. We'll talk about individuals first. Charitable contributions have, and this is under the first version of the CARES Act, but the second version has just kind of strengthened everything. Charitable contributions are more deductible this year. I'm not going to go into like the minutia of above the line and below the line deductions because that's not exciting. And if you know that, then you probably already know. Do know that I know it's above line or below line, but just know if you made charitable contributions in 2020, they are going to be more beneficial to you than in other years. That's going to be the same for business too, because obviously they want to have people contribute to nonprofits in light of all the problems that are going on everywhere. And I know a lot of people who have done that this year, what they can. So there will be a better deduction for that than it normally is, like as far as dollar per dollar. The child tax credit and the earned income credit is also enhanced for lower income families. So again, if you have family members or something that sometimes don't file or don't think they should file, especially this year, you should encourage them to at least like do a TurboTax or something and take a look. Also important is unemployment benefits. They are taxable. I think we're going to have a lot of issues where people did not withhold tax on that. A lot of times it's not a big deal, especially if you're only doing like the $1,000 a month or whatever that the state of Florida gives you. But obviously this year, in light of the increase in unemployment that came from the CARES Act, if you were making like $900 a week for even if it was 3 months and didn't pay taxes on it, eventually that's going to come back to you. The IRS is not forgiving. They will not be like, and I don't see them putting that, I don't see any legislative relief for that ever. So if you are somebody who received unemployment or somebody in your family received unemployment or your employees received unemployment, it's something you should encourage them to make sure that they're doing. Don't put your head in the sand about taxes for 2020, especially since it's probably going to be a pretty easy tax year to get rid of your tax liability. There is some financial aid relief for people like students with financial aid. Some of that does not get included anymore for the 2020 year. It might get extended to 2021. But again, especially if you've got college students in your life or you're somebody who are just getting financial aid through some other type of program, the VA or whatever, that's worth looking at. Again, something to be excited about. And then any PPP expenses, or no, sorry, PPE, the 2 PPs of COVID. And that's like face masks, face shields, all of that sort of stuff. That is tax deductible, also tax deductible for businesses. So if you're a business that did a lot like a daycare, a restaurant, some businesses had to put a whole lot of money into that, then that is all going to be tax deductible dollar for dollar, which is pretty unusual for deductions and also good. Now, as far as stuff that helps businesses with their taxes, we've talked a little bit about that, but the major thing is during all of pretty much 2020, what everybody was saying is that the PPP loan funds were going to be taxable. And I mean, as long as you use them to pay for expenses or whatever, it would be fairly normal, like you're normal, but they weren't going to let you deduct the expenses that you paid from the PPP loan. So everybody that operates a business, you pay payroll, it's deductible because it's an expense to the business. You pay the rent and it's deductible because it's an expense to the business. They were saying that they were not going to allow you to deduct expenses that got paid with the PPP loan. It was kind of, you might not have even thought of this yet. I had been talking to my accountant for a long time about it, but most accountants had reached out and said something to people who received it. So you were thinking you were going to have that extra amount of PPP money on your books as a profit, basically. We had already taken it to income and all that and took care of it in our business. But the great news is that now you are not going to be taxed on it at all. And as long as you use that money for payroll or a covered expense, it comes out like a deduction, the normal. So it's an in and out. So it's just kind of, I mean, that is huge, especially if you've got a decent amount. Like our company has a fairly high payroll. So that 2.5 months of payroll is a good amount. It will not be taxable. Now, on top of that, for businesses, this new part of the CARES Act that just got enacted 10, 11 days ago, it included additional tax breaks. A lot of them are large. The largest one is employee retention. So if you ended up, and there's not a whole lot of calculation on that, it doesn't look like they're checking person by person. And when they were doing the PPP loan forgiveness applications, there was all kinds of crazy stuff. It's much simpler now. So they just kind of want to see basically payroll numbers and things. But as long as you kept even, I'd say half of your employees, you'll probably be fine. If you were a business that had to lay off half and still have half gone, then you're easily going to fall under the second round of PPP anyway, and probably revenue isn't going to be a huge concern. But if you were able to keep the ship pretty much the same, or at least write it by the end of the year, there's going to be huge tax breaks for having employees. The retention credit is also going to be extended through June 30th of 2021. So that means for at least the tax year of 2021, half the year at least, we're going to have additional tax credits for the year. Again, I wouldn't count, I mean, they're going to be there. What they're going to look like exactly, I don't know. But if you were super conservative in 2020, you're probably looking at a pretty good tax refund in 2020. And if you're a business owner, that doesn't probably normally happen very much to you. So that's a plus. But if you're very much into it with your accountants, or you like the numbers, you could do some projections. But probably no accountant is going to have time for that until probably at least the third quarter of 2021. But just be knowing that that's out there, especially if you have to, and that's where it gets back to what I said at the beginning. Normally, we try to push all revenue into the new year and push all expenses into the old year if you own a business of any kind. It's just smart. This year, that really isn't a concern, because most likely whatever you thought your tax picture was for 2020, it's going to be a whole lot better. So if you were holding checks, you might want to try to push them into 2020, or if you had expenses that you were trying to push, that's what I'm saying, it's just going to be a whole lot better. So they push revenue into 2021. And then probably in 2021, it's still going to be better than what 2022 will be. So be thinking about that the whole year long. I mean, I was kind of thinking about my PPP write-off the whole year long, but be thinking about all these things the whole year long in your planning for your business, because it is going to make a huge difference, which is kind of nice. It's nice to know that we're going to have like a boon instead of like a bust, which I know we were all stressed out if you own businesses at the start of this. There is some actual real relief coming, whether you got the PPP loan or not. Now, the second round of stimulus checks is coming. It should have come already. A lot of people are receiving them, a lot aren't. It's 75,000 or 150,000 as a filer jointly. If you're over those amounts, you just don't get one. But it's obviously, it impacts your employees and things. One other huge thing, I see that if you own a business and you own a building and you rent from yourself, two different entities or not, I mean, and that's pretty normal. People do that all the time. That part is not going to be forgivable, or at least not tax forgivable. So if you're paying rent to yourself, basically somehow that's not going to be forgivable. That does impact a lot of my clients. It does impact a lot of people, but it's still the right way to go about having a business. And at least you're still getting the deduction of the rent, but know that that's not gonna, it's not like paying a landlord. It's not forgivable the way it is if you pay a landlord. So there is a whole lot of things to be thinking about as far as all of this stuff. The $600 stimulus, it is per dependent as well. Obviously, it might come up again as a third round, or they're going to go up to the 2,000 or whatever. Just be paying attention to that. If you moved recently, you need to file the form, the change your address form at USPS.gov as soon as possible. I know some people were still chasing things around or chasing their benefit around, but it's still worth looking into and getting if you can, obviously. For the second PPP loan as well, you have to have under 100 employees, and as long as you got close to about 70% of that, the salary that you were paying, you'll be able to get that huge tax credit. Again, if you're a sole proprietor, you are your own employee. So if you have 1099 workers, they are your employees for these purposes. So don't just think, oh, this doesn't apply to me. Make sure it doesn't apply to you, because they've made it as expansive as possible to apply to as many businesses as possible. Most people know, well, a lot of people know this already because people are excited about it. Another tax change is that 100% of meals are deductible again. It had been deductible, 100% of meals used for business, get those receipts, have been deductible, but that got taken away with the tax change a couple of years ago. It's back for 20 and 21. It's not, or so save those receipts. My accountant has already told me that they're probably going to be auditing. That's going to be a spot where they audit a good bit, since it's an easy place to audit. So whereas a lot of times the rule of thumb is if it was under $75, don't worry about it. If it's on your credit card bill, don't worry about it. If you are somebody who entertains a lot, especially if they're high level dollars, high dollar entertainment, not like just going to Panera, or it's not really easy to see, then you need to save those receipts, write on them what they are, who you took out, and all of that, because they probably will be getting scrutinized a whole lot. And that's just important. For the second round of PPP, it is not open yet. The first 2 days are going to be held open to only community banks because they're trying to get the underserved. If you have a community bank that you work with, I did hear a lot of great feedback from people who used community banks for their PPP loans. People were really happy with that. I know some people use places in the Midwest and all kinds of stuff, but if you had one that you used or have one that you have any type of relationship with, now's probably the time to rekindle that or open an account if you've got time. Most banks didn't let you do the PPP loan if you didn't have an account with them. There were PayPal had one, Cabbage had one, lots of like lenders like that had them. So those are places to look at. And obviously the bank where you got your first one, you could obviously go get your second one, but there was a whole lot of other ways to get it besides just go to your bank. I helped a lot of people who had heartburn just trying to get somebody in the first place, but don't narrow your focus, broaden your focus, because there's a lot of financial institutions that are going to have these loans and that had them in the first round. You do have to make a good faith statement that you need the money. It's the same claim that you made the first time. So, I mean, I think everybody kind of knows. It was a little more, if you applied it very early in the first round of PPP, which we did, there was a little bit of like, well, we don't know what this year is going to look like, but it's got to be different. I mean, it was different by the end of the year. So I assume everybody who even if you're on the bubble, again, if you're super on the bubble, ask a lawyer, ask your accountant, but your numbers should show you. If you had a downturn last year in your revenue in any way, I would say you could have a good faith basis of saying that 2021 is also going to be difficult, even if it's just the first 6 months of it, which is why some of the stuff has already been extended into the first 6 months of 2021. A lot of the details are going to be the same as far as how you apply and everything. It's still the same 2.5 months of payroll and rent. You can use it over 8 weeks or 24 weeks. When we first started, it was only 8 weeks, but you could stretch that out. And most people, obviously, that helped to stretch it out a bit. They've added a few other things that you can add to the calculation. A lot of it is cloud computing. What that's going to look like exactly, I don't know. But probably any computer expenses and server expenses and that sort of thing, don't go overboard. I mean, we've already seen the stories of the people who tried to go overboard with their PPP money round one. Don't be one of those people because they are being prosecuted. But yeah, they are opening that up. And also PPE, so that personal protective gear is also included. So if you spend a whole lot of that on 2020, that can be added into your PPP loan, especially if it's something like that's an ongoing expense, because there's some businesses that are just ongoing. I mean, restaurants, like I said, any medical facilities, there's just, you're needing that gloves and masks and all that, and they're only going up in price. I know that. Loan is going to close on March 31st. When the first round of PPP came around, we had no idea when it was going to close. This is supposed to close the 31st. I doubt they will extend it, but it's possible. But we don't have to scramble around like crazy people the way we did the first time. There is time to take care of this. So just take your time, see how your taxes are flowing for 2020, see what your needs are for 2021. Take your time, and then you can make a very educated decision about what's best for your business. Talk to your professionals if you're not sure what the best way to go is, especially if maybe you want to go back and revise your first PPP loan application. The EIDL grant is back again. So this is just the grant where you were able to apply. I haven't, like I said, I checked the SBA website this morning and it wasn't up there. As soon as it is, we'll put it out there on all of our social media. But it's $1,000 per employee up to 10,000, kind of how it ended up being last year. So not just the 10,000 for everybody. It is per employee, but obviously if you've got more than 10 employees, you can apply for it again. Obviously, I encourage everybody to do that. And when the time comes that we know how, I'll let you know. I promise we'll be looking at it too. You can still, if you're a sole proprietor, you're an employee of yourself. So you still can get that $1,000. Again, definitely worth doing. You do have to make the good faith claim that you've had an economic injury in your business. There is a 30% requirement. This one is more clear. So you have to show a 30% loss during any 8-week period of 2020. So it's a little bit of a different calculation than the PPP one because they're using quarter by quarter, but you could use any 8-week period in 2020 to be able to apply for one of these grants. So again, it's worth running the numbers to do it and see if you apply for whatever you use it for. Other things that are important, we're going to get into a few more general things now that work for businesses and people again. There is rental assistance back. There's been a whole lot of that eviction on, off. But this is for commercial and just your home evictions. Landlords or tenants can apply. The tenants must sign off on it because the tenant has to be impacted by coronavirus. It is tenant driven, not landlord driven. Again, most tenants that I know though have been, especially in the business context, in home, like in home rental and apartment rental, not always, but a lot of them obviously have been. And again, this is for the whole country, but if you're a landlord or a tenant, it's something to be taking a look at if you haven't been able to pay all of your rent or your tenant hasn't been able to pay all of their rent. It's not required, but there's a priority for people who have been unemployed for 90 days or more. And it looks at income too, like median incomes, if your income is less than 50% of the median income. So if you are somebody who is near eviction or close to eviction or has been evicted, even if you've been evicted, this might help you find a new place. It's definitely something to look into. Florida has started their evictions again. So if you're somebody who's in the middle of that, it's time to look into this pretty clearly and quickly. Unemployment has gone up. We talked a little bit about making sure that you pay it again. It's a 50-week maximum to the $300 a week boost that's been added. But the program will probably stay open only for about 10 to 11 weeks. So again, if you were somebody who was thinking about whether you should bring employees back, or you did bring employees back and maybe it was too early, but you were trying to just do the right thing, this is stuff that you probably should get a little bit of a talk to with somebody about it, because potentially you can make a change to your strategy because more unemployment is going to be available now. A couple other important things, just if you're a business owner, but as a consumer too, COVID protection is now in the Florida House and Senate. Many states have already passed this. They already have protection or immunity for the businesses in their community from lawsuits relating to COVID. Florida's been a little behind on that, but there is the first statute is in. There's a House and Senate version of the Florida House and Senate. They're pretty close to the same though. So important things to be thinking about, especially if you are somebody who thinks you have a claim that's related to COVID. We've already been getting the calls, so they're definitely out there. And Healthcare, first of all, is going to be totally separate. They're going to get their own statute. So if you're in healthcare, that'll be different. This is for non-healthcare. They're going to require, if you're bringing a claim against a business, to plead it very specifically about how you got COVID. And you also have to find a doctor to do an affidavit that says more likely than not, being in your business caused COVID. That's always one of the issues, like how can you figure out where you got COVID? It's very difficult. So that stuff, it's going to be a pretty high standard. The statute of limitations is only going to be a year. So from the time the legislation passes, you'll have a year to bring your claim. That's very much lower than anything else. Pretty much the quickest statute of limitations in Florida anyway is 2 years. So they're going to want to take care of it fast. That's good though too, because then you'll know, like, as you renew your insurance and stuff, that liability will cut off for this kind of thing, because that's going to be a concern for any business that have had people in, or have had to go to customers, or I mean, pretty much that's most businesses that have been open have had to interact with people in some way, or they wouldn't be essential and be open anyway. You do also need to be thinking about the vaccine. And stuff is coming out daily almost from the Department of Labor and OSHA and the EEOC about whether you can require vaccinations from your employees, or if you are an employee, which a lot of us are that as well, whether you can, whether your employer can force you to get a vaccine. So the latest and greatest on that has come out. There's been guidance since March of 2020, but the latest and greatest on that has come out also. So I'm going to kind of close with that, because that is going to be an important concern for businesses and consumers. You can require a vaccine. However, there are multiple pitfalls. So if you are going to do it, I would not do that without talking to multiple professionals in your life, including your lawyer and your insurance carrier, workers' comp, what the liability, depending on your business, you probably have several types of insurance. And especially if you're going to get them on site. But even if you're not going to get them on site, whoever you use, whoever you contract with to give those vaccinations, you're going to need to have a pretty tight contract with them to make sure you have indemnity or whatever. Or if you're just an employee going to get the shots, you're going to want to check all this out. Who is providing it at your workplace? Or if you have to go somewhere, where is that somewhere? And what are their credentials? So there's going to be some people that just cannot get the coronavirus vaccination or whatever type it is because of either religious beliefs or health issues. Obviously, two very different issues that create their own set of problems. If it is because of religious beliefs, you cannot then, obviously you can't discriminate. So if somebody has a closely held religious belief, again, those are all all this is very difficult to prove. People come to us with these types of cases. It's difficult to prove, but you can't get into that. Are you really religious? Is this really your religion? Is this really what your religion requires? No. So when somebody comes to you with that stuff, again, that's probably a call to me or some other lawyer or some HR professional or something. Don't just reply from the hip. But so that's the issue with the religious. Health is another issue also, and that's going to be pretty difficult to prove as well if somebody has a condition where they really can't get the vaccine. Number one important thing, though, to think about there is whatever they tell you in order to say they can't get the vaccine is HIPAA protected. We kind of talked about this earlier when all this stuff started with the temperature checks and recording temperatures. You've got to keep that stuff very private and secret. Because it is HIPAA, and if you get it out there, I mean, even like we had a lot of this in the spring and summer, people who had employees get coronavirus, and then how you tell the rest of your employees, you got to keep all that secure. If you do not, you have violated HIPAA. It is a monetary fine. You can't be sued personally for it or civilly, but again, you don't want to be messing with that. So be cognizant of being very careful in your pre-vaccinating protocols if you are going to do that, to make sure that you're taking care of the health data. And honestly, if you can find a company to do this for you, outsource it, please. It's just bigger business, like hospitals and things are ready for it, it's fine. But even larger businesses like universities and daycares, there's going to be larger businesses that are going to have to figure out how they want to do this. Outsourcing is the way to go. But do know that you could potentially eventually be fired if you do not get the coronavirus vaccination and your job requires it. It is possible. There are many hoops I'd want you to jump through. And basically the standard is going to be that there's no way to either safeguard the employee who doesn't get the vaccine or the employees around them if they don't get it. And that would be the key to firing. And that happens. I mean, that's also when people can't do their job because they can't lift anymore. It's kind of the same standard. When we have to, when an employee can't be hired after a workers' comp injury because they can't actually physically do their job. It's going to be the same thing, but it's going to be difficult to show. There'll be a lot more guidance on this, but again, if it's an issue, you need to be thinking about it. If there are ways to build partitions or any of that sort of thing, maybe go into an extra office space because it's been the business next to you closed. Now's the time to be thinking about that, especially since stuff that you do for PPE, the personal protective equipment, and changes that you make to your business are going to be tax deductible. Now's the time to do it. So maybe kind of thinking down the road, if you've got a workforce and you know some will not get the vaccine and you're going to be concerned about it, maybe now's the time to make some changes that you had been putting off in the business. The flip side of that is if you're going to be able to get immunity from people suing you for coronavirus, then that's helpful. There's not a whole lot of guidance, though, of how workers' comp will come into that, but your worker is workers' comp. So it's not time to go crazy yet. There's going to always be some avenue to protection. But again, if you're putting off adding cubicles or any of that kind of stuff, call it PPE changes and make it tax deductible. It is right now, so you'd be crazy not to do it. Or add it to your PPP loan round 2. It's just being smart and thinking ahead. So, I mean, if you are thinking about vaccines in your business, at least in the short term, offering incentives is probably a whole lot better of a way to go than requiring it, because requiring it's going to be slippery. But things like gift cards and bonuses and time off or any of that, for people who opt in to the coronavirus vaccination, it's a good way to at least get started. But if you've got any questions about that, I'm always here. If you've got any questions about any of the stuff that we've talked about, I'm always here. We're looking always at all of this stuff as it comes, and I didn't want to do any of these, talk about it until I knew what I was talking about, and there was stuff to talk about. Clearly, there's plenty to talk about. We'll continue to keep you updated. If you have questions, let me know, and follow our Facebook page because we'll put the applications on there as they come up, and I'll continuously be watching on this. It's a lot less hectic than it was back in March when everything was crazy, March and April when we started these. But now is really the time to be a smart business owner. There's a lot of advantages that you could take, so I want you to be able to take them. Thanks everybody for listening. This recording will be out on our YouTube and everything. And like I said, if anybody has any questions that hears this on a repeat, please send it to us any way you know how, including through social media, and I'll answer them. Thanks a lot, everybody, for your attention, and good luck out there. Happy to see the people that are in the chat, all good friends. I like seeing the people who pop up in this. But thanks. Have a good Friday.